My husband's ashes were making the room feel heavy, my daughter-in-law said. She did not whisper it. She did not look ashamed. She stood in the middle of the library my husband had built with his own hands, holding an iced coffee, and said it as though she were discussing an old rug that no longer matched the curtains. The designer said the urn ruined the aesthetic. For a moment, I did not understand. I stared at the center shelf. The shelf where Thomas had rested for the last 3 months. Only a pale square of dust remained. I did not scream. I did not slap her. I did not collapse the way women are expected to collapse when something sacred is taken from them. I simply stood there, one hand still wrapped around the paper pharmacy bag, and realized I had forgotten how to breathe. My name is Margaret Whitmore. I am 71 years old. And until that Thursday afternoon, I believed grief was the cruelest thing a woman could survive. I was wrong. Follow my story until the end, and comment the city you're watching from. I want to know how far the story of one old woman, one stolen dignity, and one house full of ghosts can reach. The house smelled like fresh paint and lemon polish when I came home. Not the soft smell of home. Not coffee warming on the counter. Not Thomas's shaving soap drifting from the upstairs bathroom. Not the faint cedar scent from the old coat closet. It smelled sharp, expensive, temporary. Drills echoed from somewhere above me. A man I did not recognize crossed the foyer carrying a wrapped mirror taller than he was. Another worker came down the stairs with a cardboard box pressed against his hip. Something inside it shifted and clinked. I stood just inside the front door, still wearing the navy sweater Thomas always liked on me. It was a simple sweater, wool, slightly stretched at one cuff. He used to say the color made my eyes look less tired. That morning, I had worn it because I had a doctor's appointment, and I still did small things that made me feel married. The foyer table was gone. In its place stood a narrow black console with a marble top. On it sat a bowl full of smooth, white stones. Decorative stones. The sort of thing nobody needs but people buy when they want a room to look untouched by ordinary life. I set my pharmacy bag down carefully because my hands had begun to tremble. A young mover brushed past me carrying Thomas's antique reading chair. The green one. The chair that used to sit beside the library fireplace. Thomas had read in that chair every evening for almost 30 years. The left arm was worn smooth where his hand rested. There was a faint ink mark on the cushion from the year Daniel was 16 and exploded a fountain pen while doing homework. Careful with that, I said. The mover barely turned his head. Sure thing, ma'am. Then he carried it out the front door as if it had no weight at all. I looked into the living room. The floral curtains Thomas and I bought in Vermont were gone. The brass lamp from his first architecture office had disappeared. The family photographs had been removed from the mantel. Our wedding photo. Daniel at age 6 with missing front teeth. Thomas holding our first golden retriever in the backyard. Gone. In their place were 3 large abstract canvases in black and white. Cold lines. Sharp corners. No faces. No memories. Vanessa appeared from the dining room with her tablet tucked under one arm and an iced coffee in her hand. She was 38, though she had the careful, expensive look of a woman determined never to appear tired. Blonde hair perfectly styled. Cream sweater. Dark jeans. Diamond earrings Daniel bought her last Christmas after she hinted for 3 weeks that small luxury pieces hold emotional value. Margaret, she said brightly. You're home early. Home. The words sat strangely in her mouth. I looked past her toward the hallway. Where is Thomas's chair? She glanced toward the driveway. Oh, that old thing? The upholstery smelled musty. We're donating it. We. Not I. Not Daniel, and I. We. As if the house had already voted without me. That chair was your father-in-law's favorite, I said. Her smile remained, but it tightened at the edges. I know. But sometimes sentiment keeps people trapped, Margaret. A worker upstairs laughed loudly. Someone turned on music. A pop song pulsed faintly through the ceiling. I looked at Vanessa. What is happening in the library? Her eyes moved briefly toward the hallway. Just briefly. Enough. I told you, she said. A few updates. You said light updates. Yes. Well. She lifted one shoulder. Once the designer saw the room, she explained it needed a more complete vision. A complete vision. I'm turning it into a lounge space. Something warmer. More usable. Daniel agrees the room needed new energy. New energy. Thomas had designed that library before Daniel was born. He sketched the first version of it on a napkin in a diner off I-95 because we could not afford a real architect's drafting table yet, even though he was an architect himself. He built the shelves slowly, one section at a time on weekends. Walnut. Hand-stained. He installed the rolling ladder after saving for 6 months. Every inch of that room had been touched by him. Every inch. I walked past Vanessa. She said my name once, lightly, as though calling back a child about to step into mud. I did not stop. The hallway felt longer than usual. With each step, the sounds of the house grew distant. The drills. The music. The workers. Vanessa's heels behind me. All of it blurred into a low ringing in my ears. When I reached the library doorway, I stopped. The Persian rug from our anniversary trip to New York had been rolled up and tied with rope. Thomas's records were stacked carelessly beside 2 black trash bags. The shelves were half empty. Books leaned in awkward piles on the floor. Architecture volumes. Old journals. Leather-bound histories of Connecticut homes. Several had fallen open, pages bent beneath the weight of other books. The fireplace tools were gone. The globe was gone. The framed photograph of Thomas standing beside his first completed building was gone. And the urn was missing. At first, my mind refused the information. It offered me reasonable explanations. Maybe they moved it to clean. Maybe it was boxed carefully. Maybe Daniel had taken it upstairs. Maybe. I walked to the center shelf. The silver urn had rested there since the funeral, beside our wedding photograph and a small brass clock Thomas repaired twice but never replaced. A simple urn. Not flashy. Thomas hated flashy things. There was only dust now. A pale rectangle where it had been. My throat closed. Vanessa, I said. She appeared behind me. Yes. I did not turn around. Where is my husband? There was a silence. Not the silence of guilt. The silence of inconvenience. Then she sighed. Margaret, please don't make this dramatic. Dramatic. I turned then. Slowly. She held her coffee with both hands now. The urn didn't fit the redesign, she said. The designer said the room needed cleaner lines. And, honestly, keeping ashes in the main living area can feel a little depressing. Depressing. My husband of 46 years had become depressing. What did you do with him? I asked. Her mouth tightened. I asked the movers to clear unnecessary items yesterday. Unnecessary items. Something inside me went very still. You threw him away. She blinked, as if offended by the bluntness. It wasn't personal. I looked at her. Where is he? Margaret. Where is he? Her voice lowered. Technically, they're just ashes. Thomas wouldn't want the whole house frozen in grief forever. Just ashes. I heard Thomas's laugh in my memory. Low. Warm. A little rough after the chemo. I saw his hand on the edge of his hospital blanket. The gold wedding band loose on his finger because illness had thinned him so much. I saw Daniel crying at the cemetery. I saw myself standing in the rain, holding the program from the service until the paper softened in my palm. Just ashes. Vanessa took a sip of coffee. Honestly, she said, looking around the room, the house already feels lighter. I said nothing, because if I opened my mouth, I knew something would come out of me that no amount of age or manners could call back. Then I saw it, through the front window near the library door, beside the curb, near 2 black contractor bags. A thin streak of gray dust scattered along the edge of the driveway. For a second, the world narrowed to that gray line. The shelf, the trash bags, the dust. My husband. Vanessa was still speaking, something about closure, about design harmony, about not living in the past. But I could no longer hear her. I walked out of the library. Past the empty mantel. Past the marble console with decorative stones. Past the workers who suddenly became very interested in not looking at me. Outside, the October air hit my face. Cold. Damp. smelling of rain and sawdust. The contractor bag, near the curb, was partly open. I crouched beside it. My knees protested. My right hand shook so badly I had to steady it against the concrete. Inside, beneath broken packing foam and strips of wallpaper, I saw fragments of silver metal. Ash clung to the black plastic liner. The engraved piece lay face up. T.W. Thomas Whitmore. Beloved husband. Beloved father. I touched it with 2 fingers. So gently, as if he could still feel pain. Behind me, someone whispered, "Oh God." A young mover. Not Vanessa. Not Daniel. A stranger had more horror in his voice than my family had shown all day. I gathered what I could with trembling hands. Ash. Metal. A piece of engraved silver. A corner of the velvet lining. Wind moved across the driveway and lifted a soft gray trace toward the street. I pressed my palm down against the bag. No, y whispered. Not to Vanessa. Not to the workers. To the wind. No, that was how my daughter-in-law tried to remove my husband from our home. Not with shouting. Not with hatred she had the courage to name. With design language. With polite efficiency. With a trash bag at the curb. And that was the first moment I understood something I had been too tired, too heartbroken, and too trusting to see. Vanessa had not started erasing Thomas that day. She had only stopped hiding it from me. I stayed crouched by the curb until my legs began to ache. The young mover stood a few feet away, cap in his hands, looking like a boy who had accidentally walked into a church after breaking a window. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "I didn't know." I believed him. Cruelty often needs ordinary people to carry boxes without knowing what is inside them. I looked up. "What is your name?" "Caleb." "Caleb," I said, "could you bring me a clean cardboard box?" He nodded quickly and almost ran toward the truck. Vanessa stood in the doorway now. She did not come outside. That told me something. A woman who believes she has done nothing wrong walks toward the damage. Vanessa stayed framed by the front door, one hand on the handle, her face composed in that careful way people use when they are calculating witnesses. "Margaret," she called softly, "please come inside. The neighbors don't need to see this." The neighbors. Not Thomas. Not me. The neighbors. I looked at the house across the street. Mrs. Halpern's curtains moved slightly. She had lived there 22 years and brought lasagna the day after Thomas died. Let her see, I thought. Let the whole street see. But I did not say it. My mother raised me to believe that dignity was something you carried even when others tried to strip it from you. So I lowered my eyes and waited for Caleb. He returned with a clean moving box and a stack of white packing paper. "I'm sorry," he said again. "Thank you." He stood there awkwardly. Then, very gently, he helped me lift the larger fragments from the bag. Neither of us spoke. The ash clung to everything. My fingertips. The torn velvet. A strip of tape. The corner of the contractor bag. It seemed impossible that something as large as Thomas's life could become something so fine. So easy for the wind to take. I heard a car door close behind me. "Mom, Daniel." His voice came from the driveway. Tired. Distracted. A man returning from the city expecting dinner, not consequence. I did not turn. His footsteps approached, then slowed. "What are you doing out here?" Then he saw the box. The broken urn. The ash. The expression on his face changed in stages. Confusion first. Then discomfort. Then fear. Not grief. Fear. The fear of a man realizing that what he had allowed inside private rooms had spilled into the open. "Mom," he said carefully, "Vanessa told me there was a misunderstanding." I looked up at him. "Your father is in a garbage bag." He swallowed. His eyes moved toward Vanessa in the doorway. She gave him a look. Small. Sharp. I saw it. For the first time, I truly saw the choreography between them. She signaled. He softened. She decided. He explained. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck, the same way he did as a teenager when he dented Thomas's car and tried to decide whether to confess. The urn was damaged. Accidentally during the renovation, he said. Did the accident carry him to the curb? His face tightened. Mom. Did the accident put him under wallpaper samples? Vanessa stepped forward then, but only onto the porch. Margaret, this isn't fair. The movers were clearing items quickly. No one meant disrespect. I stood slowly. My knees hurt. My hands were gray with ash. I held them out slightly, palms up. Then what did you mean? No one answered. A truck passed behind Daniel on the street. The sound filled the silence for a moment, then faded. Daniel looked at my hands. For 1 second, I thought he might cry. Instead, he said, Vanessa thought keeping Dad's ashes in the library was making it harder for everyone to move forward. Move forward. 14 weeks. That was how long Thomas had been gone. 14 weeks since the hospital bed. 14 weeks since the machines. 14 weeks since I signed paperwork with a pen that had a hospital logo on it because nobody could find mine. 14 weeks since Daniel held my arm at the cemetery and told me I would never have to stand alone. I looked at my son. There are still sympathy cards on the kitchen counter. He closed his eyes. I know. His robe is still behind the bathroom door. I know. His reading glasses are still beside our bed. His voice lowered. Mom, maybe that's the problem. The words came softly, almost kindly. That made them worse. The problem. My husband's traces had become the problem. Not Vanessa's cruelty. Not Daniel's absence. Not the strangers stripping our house while I picked up prescriptions. My memory. My mourning. My refusal to erase quickly enough. I nodded once. Not because I agreed. Because I understood where we stood. Caleb quietly placed the last visible fragment into the box. I'm very sorry, ma'am, he said. I turned to him. You did not do this. He looked relieved and ashamed at the same time. I carried the box inside myself. No one offered to take it. Or perhaps they did, and I did not hear. The house had become too loud again. Workers. Music. Vanessa's low voice speaking quickly to Daniel in the foyer. I moved up the stairs 1 step at a time. The cardboard box felt almost weightless. That was unbearable. In the bedroom, I placed what remained of Thomas on the dresser. Then I went into the bathroom and washed my hands. Ash turned the water gray. I watched it circle the drain. My hands shook harder then. Not outside. Not where they could see. Only there, in the small bathroom Thomas and I had shared for decades, beside his toothbrush still standing in the blue ceramic cup. I gripped the sink. The mirror showed an old woman with damp silver hair, pale lips, and eyes that looked too awake. Downstairs, Vanessa laughed. A short sound. Maybe at something Daniel said. Maybe at the absurdity of the day. Maybe because people like Vanessa laugh when they are nervous and call it confidence. I dried my hands slowly. Then I opened Thomas's side of the medicine cabinet. His razor. His aftershave. A small bottle of heart medication with 3 pills left inside. I touched the bottle. The grief that came then was not loud. It was physical. A heaviness in the ribs. A hollow behind the eyes. A tiredness so deep I wanted to sit on the bathroom floor and remain there until someone remembered I was human. But no one came upstairs. That was another answer. That night, the house continued changing around me. The renovation crew worked late because Vanessa wanted the library cleared before the weekend. I sat on the edge of the bed in the dark, listening. Furniture dragged across floors. Tape ripped from boxes. Cabinet doors opened and shut. At one point, a worker laughed, then quickly stopped. Maybe someone had reminded him a widow was upstairs. A widow. That word had begun to feel less like a marital status and more like a room people put you in so they could speak around you. Downstairs, Vanessa opened wine. I heard the cork. Then her voice. The place is finally starting to breathe again. Daniel replied, but too quietly for me to make out the words. I imagined him standing at the kitchen island, one hand around a glass, shoulders curved from a long day. I imagined Vanessa beside him, touching his arm, lowering her voice, telling him I was fragile. That word had appeared often since Thomas died. Fragile. Emotional. Stuck. Overwhelmed. Words. That sounded like concern, but behaved like keys. Keys to rooms I was no longer allowed to control. I looked at the cardboard box on the dresser. Thomas had built homes for other people his entire life. He believed walls mattered, that staircases mattered, that where morning light entered a kitchen could change the way a family began its day. He used to say, "A house remembers what people repeat inside it." If that was true, then this house remembered everything. Daniel's first steps in the hallway. My mother's last Thanksgiving at our dining table. Thomas falling asleep in the library with a book open on his chest. The night we learned his cancer had spread. The morning he looked at me and said, "Don't let them make you small after I'm gone." At the time, I thought he was speaking of grief. Now I wondered if he had meant something else. Near midnight, I heard Vanessa outside my bedroom door. She was speaking to someone on the phone. Her voice was low, but not low enough. "No, she's upset, obviously," she said. "But Daniel agrees. The house can't stay like a shrine." A pause. Then a soft laugh. "I know. Old people attach meaning to everything." My hand tightened around the bedspread. Old people. Not Margaret. Not Daniel's mother. Not Thomas's wife. Old people. I waited until her footsteps moved away. Then I stood. I walked to the dresser and opened the top drawer. Inside was Thomas's leather glasses case. I picked it up. His fingerprints still smudged the edge. For the first time that day, my tears stopped. Not because the pain eased, because something colder had entered the room. Clarity. Vanessa had not thrown away an urn. She had tested how much of me could be moved aside before I objected. And Daniel had watched. That night, I did not sleep. I sat beside the dresser until dawn, with Thomas's broken urn in front of me and his glasses case in my hand. By morning, I understood one thing clearly. If I let them call this grief, they would use my sorrow to take everything else. At 5 in the morning, the house was finally quiet.
No drills.
No music. No designer voices floating through the rooms with words like balance and flow and negative space. Only the old house settling around me, the creaks in the walls, a soft ticking from the hallway clock, rain tapping lightly against the windows. I put on my robe and went downstairs. The stairs complained under my feet in the same places they always had. Thomas used to say he could identify every family member by the sound they made on those stairs. Daniel ran down them as a boy. I stepped carefully. Thomas descended slowly in later years, one hand on the rail, pretending he did not need help. The kitchen was dark except for the small light above the stove. Vanessa's wineglass sat in the sink with a lipstick mark on the rim. Beside it were 2 untouched plates covered loosely with plastic wrap. Cold salmon. Asparagus. Something catered. No one had saved me a plate. Or maybe they had, in the technical sense. Food existed, but no invitation had. That is how humiliation often works in families. Not with slamming doors. With a chair not pulled out. A conversation that pauses when you enter. A plate left behind as proof that someone can say later, "But we thought of you." I made coffee in the old drip machine Vanessa hated. It sputtered and hissed like an elderly animal. Thomas had bought it at a hardware store after our expensive one broke during a snowstorm. Vanessa once said it looked depressing on the counter. I liked it because it still worked. While the coffee brewed, I looked around the kitchen. Small gold sticky labels had appeared on several cabinet doors. Remove. Replace. Update hardware. One was stuck to the pantry door. Inside that pantry were pencil marks on the frame where Thomas measured Daniel's height every birthday until he was 16 and declared the tradition embarrassing. Vanessa had placed a gold label over the marks. Paint. I peeled it off slowly. The paper made a tiny tearing sound. It should not have felt like defiance. It did. I carried my coffee into the library. The room looked worse in the early light. Not destroyed. That might have been easier. Destroyed has honesty. This was curated damage. Empty spaces where books had stood. Clean rectangles on dusty shelves. Rolled rugs. Stacked boxes. The fireplace stripped of its tools. The chair missing from its corner. The room had not been demolished. It had been made to look as if Thomas had never mattered there. I walked to the west cabinet. Thomas kept important things there because he liked having practical matters near beautiful ones. Blueprints beside poetry. Tax documents beside family albums. Warranty papers beside letters from old clients who still wrote to thank him years later. The cabinet doors were half open. Inside, most of the blueprint boxes were gone. My stomach tightened. I crouched carefully. At 71, crouching is no longer casual. Every movement requires negotiation. A few loose folders remained. Old invoices. A yellowed envelope of photographs. A stack of roofing estimates from 1998. Behind them, wedged in the back corner, was a cardboard tube. I reached for it. Dust coated my fingers. The tube was tied with faded blue ribbon. Thomas's handwriting ran along the side. Whitmore Residence. Original foundation layout. October 1981. I sat back on my heels. The year we bought the land. The year we had almost no furniture but insisted on planting 2 maple trees in the front yard because Thomas said shade was an act of faith. Inside the tube was a folded blueprint, and tucked into the fold was an envelope. My name was written across it. Margaret. I knew that handwriting better than I knew my own reflection. Steady. Slightly slanted. Always careful. I sat in the broken leather chair near the fireplace. The only chair left because one leg needed repair and Vanessa did not like imperfect things unless they were expensive enough to be called antique. For a long time, I only held the envelope. Some letters frighten you before they are opened. Finally, I slid my finger beneath the flap. Inside was one page. Margaret, if you are reading this, it means someone has started changing the house before you were ready. I stopped. The clock ticked in the hall. Rain moved softly against the windows. Thomas knew. Not everything, perhaps. Not the trash bag. Not Vanessa's exact words. But he knew enough. I kept reading. This home was never only wood and stone to me. It was proof that we built a life worth protecting. Some people will call your memories clutter, because they cannot profit from what cannot be replaced. My throat tightened. Do not let anyone convince you that grief makes you incapable. Grief means you loved. It does not mean you surrendered your judgment. I pressed my hand over my mouth. There were no dramatic sobs. Only tears slipping down a tired face in a half-empty library. At the bottom of the page, Thomas had underlined one sentence twice. If they ever try to erase us, do not surrender quietly. The front door opened. A car door slammed outside. Voices entered the foyer. The renovation crew had arrived early. I folded the letter carefully and slipped it into the pocket of my robe. Vanessa's heels clicked across the hardwood moments later. We need to finish the library today, she said to someone. By Friday, I want this room completely transformed. Completely transformed. I looked around. The room. The shelves. The dust. The place where Thomas had rested. For the first time since his funeral, the grief inside me shifted. It did not leave. It changed posture. It stood up. I rose from the chair and walked into the hallway. Vanessa was near the front door, reviewing fabric samples with a designer in a black turtleneck. She glanced at me. "Oh," she said. "You're awake." "I live here," I replied. The designer looked down at her tablet. Vanessa's smile thinned. "Of course. I just meant you usually rest in the mornings." Rest. Another soft word with a locked door inside it. "I need the West cabinet left alone," I said. Her expression barely changed. "The cabinet?" "Yes." The storage team already cleared most of that section. I noticed. She touched the edge of her tablet. "Those were old files, Margaret. Daniel said they weren't relevant." Daniel did not know what was in them. A small pause. Too small for anyone else to notice. Large enough for me. Vanessa recovered. "Well, then we can have the storage company bring back anything important later." "Where are they taking the boxes?" "To storage." "What storage?" She blinked. "The facility." "What is the name?" Her smile cooled. "I don't have every vendor detail memorized." The designer shifted uncomfortably. I looked at Vanessa for a long moment. She looked back, still composed, but something had changed. Until then, she had been managing a grieving widow. Now she was facing a woman who had started asking specific questions. There is a difference. I turned away first. Not in defeat. in strategy. Thomas used to say that people reveal more when they think the conversation is over. By noon, the house was full of movement again. I stayed mostly upstairs, but not because I was hiding. I listened to Vanessa's voice, to Daniel's footsteps, to the names of companies spoken into phones, to which boxes were marked donation and which were marked private. At 1:15, my phone rang. Evelyn Harper. I had not spoken to her since the funeral. Evelyn had known me since college. She had seen me young, stubborn, newly married, pregnant, exhausted, proud, frightened, and grieving. Very few people live long enough beside you to recognize when your silence changes meaning. Margaret, she said softly, I've been trying to reach you.
I know. I'm sorry.
No need to apologize. Are you alone? I looked toward the bedroom door. Yes. She exhaled. I heard something ugly. My hand tightened around the phone. About the house? About Thomas. The room became very still. Evelyn continued carefully. Vanessa was at Fairfield Country Club yesterday. I was having lunch with Carol Simmons near the terrace. I didn't mean to listen. People always say that before telling you exactly what they heard. What did she say? Evelyn was quiet for a moment. She was laughing about the renovations. One of the women asked whether it was hard having Thomas's urn in the library. I closed my eyes. And, she said, old people leave clutter. Even dead ones. For a second, I felt nothing. That was the mercy of shock. Then Evelyn added, she also said the house finally looked expensive now that the depressing widow atmosphere was gone. The depressing widow atmosphere. I looked at myself in the dresser mirror.
Robe.
Silver hair.
No makeup.
A woman who had spent 46 years making that house warm. A woman now reduced to atmosphere. Margaret. Evelyn said, I'm here. I wanted you to know before it came back, through someone careless. Think. You. Her voice softened. Thomas would be furious. I touched the letter in my pocket.
No, I said.
Thomas would be prepared. After we hung up, I stood by the window. Down below, a mover carried a stack of boxes toward the truck. One box split open slightly. Rolled blueprints slid halfway out before he pushed them back in. I recognized Thomas's handwriting on the side.
Actual drawings.
Coastal projects. So Vanessa had lied. The boxes were not gone.
Not yet.
They were leaving. I walked to the closet and reached for the small leather handbag I carried only for serious occasions. Funerals, anniversaries, meetings with doctors, conversations that changed the shape of a life. Inside, I placed Thomas's letter, my reading glasses, my phone, and the small notebook I used for grocery lists. Then I looked once more at my reflection. For 3 months, I had mistaken exhaustion for helplessness. Vanessa had made the same mistake. That was going to cost her. By late morning, the house had transformed again. Vanessa moved from room to room with her tablet, fingers brushing swatches against walls, murmuring to designers, to Daniel, to herself. The air smelled faintly of cedar polish and lemon cleaner, but to me it felt sterile. My husband's presence had been scrubbed from every visible surface. The warmth, the memories, the quiet familiarity. It was gone. I stayed mostly in the library, observing. That room was sacred. It was Thomas's imprint, a map of decades. He had sketched there, built models, argued over floor plans with clients while keeping an eye on our children. Now it was a curated set of emptiness. A box labeled archive drawings. Private sat partially hidden under a work table. I crouched beside it and gently brushed dust from the lid. My fingers lingered over the handwritten name, Whitmore. My pulse tightened. That box contained documents Thomas had spent his life cataloging. Personal letters, architectural contracts, property deeds, even private trust papers. Documents nobody had the right to touch. Vanessa walked past, unaware of me. She was speaking softly to Daniel about light fixtures. I watched her shoulders tighten as she bent over the tablet.
She
believed she had complete control, that she could erase our history with a few gestures. She had underestimated me. I opened the box slowly. Blueprints rolled with faded ribbons. A small brass lockbox rested at the bottom. I had seen it before, hidden beneath older papers. Thomas always joked, "If the house burns, save you first, me second, then the lockbox." My fingers trembled as I lifted it out. The weight felt like the responsibility of a life carefully preserved. Footsteps approached. I did not move. Vanessa's heels clicked along the polished floor. She paused at the doorway. "Margaret," she said softly, voice laced with faux concern. "You shouldn't be handling those things yourself. It's dangerous." Dangerous. She meant exposure. She feared I would see. But she had already shown me more than she intended. I slid the lockbox beneath the arm of my sweater. Not hidden from the world, but hidden enough to keep Vanessa guessing. By noon, the fresh start gathering had begun. Vanessa had invited friends from her tennis group, neighbors, and a handful of Daniel's colleagues. The living room had been transformed into a staged perfection of neutral tones, sculptural objects, and polished surfaces. It looked more like a high-end magazine shoot than a home. Every family photograph, every trace of Thomas's hand, had been either boxed, stored, or superficially integrated as decor. I entered quietly, wearing the navy blouse Thomas liked on me, and cream slacks. No jewelry except his pearls from our 40th anniversary. I walked as if I belonged, but my eyes were sharp, measuring every corner. The guests barely noticed me. They were polite, cautious, afraid of the grief I carried. That was a form of invisibility I knew well. Vanessa smiled broadly. "Margaret, you joined us." She was good at masking discomfort, but I could sense the tension under her skin. Her carefully constructed world had cracks, and I was standing inside one. I moved to the display cabinet she had curated. White ceramics and crystal bowls filled the shelves. On the lowest shelf, partially hidden behind driftwood and stacked books, sat Thomas's urn. Polished, repositioned, transformed from sacred object to decorative accent. I lifted it gently. Cold metal against my palms. Empty almost in its presentation. But it was still him. Still Thomas. Daniel noticed immediately. His expression tightened. I could see the subtle panic rise behind his eyes. He had been complicit in this erasure. Now he realized it was visible to everyone. I looked around at the guests. The laughter and clinking of glasses had slowed. Conversations paused, faint curiosity and tension rippling through the room. "No," I said softly. "Not a shout. Not a performance. Just truth. Your father has spent enough time hidden away." Vanessa's smile faltered. Daniel moved toward me cautiously. "Mom, can we talk upstairs?" "No," I said. The room fell into quiet. Even the jazz music seemed hesitant. "I think your father deserves to be seen." The weight of the statement rested on everyone. Vanessa stiffened beside the fireplace, realizing her control was slipping. Daniel's face betrayed a flicker of guilt and confusion. Guests began to shift, murmuring quietly. The kind of subdued retreat that wealthy people make when they realize a show has ended and reality is standing in the room. Then the door opened. Richard Bennett, Thomas's attorney, stepped in. Silver hair, 74, authoritative yet calm. He carried a leather briefcase. Everyone's attention shifted. Even Vanessa froze. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said evenly, addressing me, "your husband left several legal protections. They become enforceable when family members knowingly disregard designated memorial property." He opened the folder, read the clauses aloud. The words were precise. If memorial items were destroyed or removed, inheritance rights were immediately revoked. The property remained under Margaret Whitmore's control for life. Vanessa's face drained of color. Daniel looked stunned. The room was silent, save for the soft jazz, the shift of weight, and the faint ticking of the grandfather clock. I held Thomas's urn against my chest. My husband had ensured that even in death, he had anticipated the erosion of memory, the manipulation, the attempt to erase his life. I did not need to raise my voice. The law and his foresight spoke for me. After Richard left, the house emptied quickly. Guests filed out silently, some casting glances at Vanessa, some avoiding eye contact entirely. Daniel lingered, shame coloring his posture. Vanessa sat rigidly by the fireplace, speechless. For once, Her words were insufficient armor. I walked upstairs to my bedroom, carrying the urn and the letter. Thomas had prepared me for this moment. Not with anger, not with revenge fantasies, but with foresight, clarity, and quiet justice. I opened the letter again. If they ever try to erase us, do not surrender quietly. I packed a small suitcase, the letter, and the urn. I left through the side door unnoticed. The driveway was busy with workers moving furniture and boxes. Vanessa's attention was elsewhere. Daniel was on the phone in the study. I was invisible. Perfectly invisible. The drive north to Lake Warmog was calm. Golden autumn leaves littered the Connecticut roads. The small cabin by the water awaited. For decades, it had been our escape. Every October, Thomas and I would sit on the old dock, watch the water, and talk about life, love, and legacy. I arrived at the cabin. The dock creaked beneath my shoes. Pine and water filled the air. I sat beside the bench Thomas had built. I opened the urn, touching the engraved letters lightly. The house, the manipulation, the betrayal, none of it followed me here. Only loyalty remained. Only love, preserved. Some people think love lives inside houses. Thomas knew better. Love survives only where loyalty remains. The first week at the lake cabin felt strange. Not peaceful. Not yet. People often imagine freedom arrives with relief. It doesn't. Not after betrayal. After betrayal comes silence. And silence can be terrifying when you've spent months listening to other people tell you who you are. The cabin sat at the edge of Lake Warmog beneath a line of aging pines. Thomas bought it in 1994 after completing a municipal project that nearly exhausted him. "We need one place nobody can redesign," he told me. At the time, I laughed. Now those words felt prophetic. The cabin was small. One bedroom. A stone fireplace. A narrow kitchen with cabinets Thomas built himself during 3 rainy weekends. Nothing matched perfectly. The floors creaked. The windows rattled when the wind blew hard. It was beautiful, not because it was expensive, because it remembered us. The first morning, I woke before sunrise. For several seconds, I forgot Thomas was gone. Then reality returned. The empty side of the bed. The quiet. The ache. Grief never disappears. It simply arrives each morning wearing a different coat. I wrapped a blanket around my shoulders and carried coffee onto the dock. Mist hovered above the lake. The water reflected pale, silver light. Thomas loved mornings like that. He used to sit exactly where I sat now, holding a chipped green mug and pretending he understood fishing better than he actually did. I smiled despite myself, then cried, then smiled again. That is widowhood. Not one emotion. 100 emotions sharing the same chair. Around 10 o'clock, I unlocked the second storage box Richard had mentioned. Inside were dozens of folders. Thomas's handwriting covered nearly every label. Personal, family, property, letters. One folder immediately caught my attention. Daniel. My stomach tightened. I carried it to the kitchen table. For several minutes, I simply stared at it. Then I opened it. Inside were copies of trust documents, financial summaries, property records, and several handwritten notes. One note had been written less than 8 months before Thomas died. I recognized the shaky penmanship immediately. His illness had already begun weakening him. Still, the message was clear. Daniel has a good heart but avoids difficult truths. If Vanessa ever places him between comfort and loyalty, he may choose comfort without realizing the cost. I read the sentence twice, then 3 times. Thomas saw it, years before I did. Not because he loved Daniel less, because he understood people honestly. The realization hurt, but it also explained things. The missed conversations, the avoided eye contact, the constant surrendering of decisions. Daniel wasn't cruel. Cruelty would have been easier. Cruelty has sharp edges. Daniel's weakness was softer, which made it more dangerous. I spent the afternoon reading, page after page, letter after letter, and pictures slowly emerged. Thomas had not prepared for revenge. He had prepared for preservation. That distinction mattered. because suddenly I understood something important. This story was never about inheritance. It was never really about the house. It was about memory, about dignity, about whether a life could be quietly erased once the person who built it was gone. And Thomas refused to allow that. That evening my phone rang. Daniel. I stared at the screen, let it ring, then answered. Mom. His voice sounded tired. Very tired. Yes. Are you okay? The question almost made me laugh. Not because it was funny, because it was late. Months late. I've been better. A pause. I deserve that. I looked out toward the dark water.
No.
You deserve honesty. Silence. Then, Vanessa moved into the guest room. I closed my eyes. There it was. The first crack. Not dramatic. Not explosive. Just a quiet consequence. What happened? We argued. About me? About Dad. Another pause. Then, about everything. For a long moment neither of us spoke. Finally Daniel said something I hadn't expected. I found the storage paperwork. My grip tightened. And it wasn't storage.
No.
It wasn't. His voice dropped. Mom, those boxes were being sent for liquidation. I closed my eyes. Even knowing it, hearing it spoken aloud hurt. Because now Daniel knew. Now he could no longer hide behind misunderstanding. I didn't know. No, I said quietly. You didn't. And for the first time since Thomas died, my son cried.
Not loudly.
Not dramatically. Just small broken breaths on the other end of the line. The sound followed me long after the call ended. 3 days later, Evelyn arrived. She brought soup. Women our age bring soup when words are insufficient. Chicken noodle. Too much parsley. Exactly the way I liked it. She placed the container on the kitchen counter and immediately hugged me. Not politely. Not carefully. The way people hug when they know you have spent too much time pretending you're fine. We sat by the fireplace while rain tapped against the windows. For a while we talked about ordinary things. The grocery store. Her arthritis. The neighbor who accidentally backed into his own mailbox. Small conversations. Safe conversations. Then she looked at me. Tell me the truth. I smiled faintly. Which truth? The one you're avoiding. I stared into the fire. The logs shifted softly. Orange light flickered across the room. Finally I spoke.
I'm angry.
Evelyn nodded. Good. The answer surprised me. Good. Margaret, you've spent your whole life turning anger into patience. I looked away, because she was right. She continued. Patience is admirable. But sometimes anger is simply self-respect arriving late. The words settled somewhere deep. I thought about the driveway, the contractor bag, the urn, the library, the way Vanessa laughed at the country club, the way Daniel looked away, the way I kept explaining their behavior to myself, because accepting the truth felt unbearable. Maybe anger wasn't the enemy. Maybe denial was. That afternoon, Evelyn helped me sort more of Thomas's papers. Near the bottom of a box, we found an old photograph. Thomas. Daniel. Age 12. Building bookshelves in the library. Both smiling. Covered in sawdust. I touched the photo gently. He worshipped his father, Evelyn said. He did. What happened? I thought about the question.
Really thought about it.
Life. I said finally.
Fear.
Comfort. Evelyn nodded. Sometimes people betray values long before they betray people. That sentence stayed with me, because it explained Vanessa too. Vanessa didn't start by discarding ashes. She started by treating sentiment as inconvenience, memory as clutter, people as assets. Everything afterward simply followed the same logic. Later that evening, after Evelyn left, I found another envelope among Thomas's papers. This one addressed directly to me. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was only one page. Margaret, if you ever find yourself standing alone, remember this. Being loved is wonderful. Being respected matters more, especially by yourself. I read the sentence several times, then folded the letter carefully. Outside, the rain stopped. The lake became perfectly still. And for the first time in months, I felt something unfamiliar. Not happiness.
Not peace.
Strength. Quiet strength. The kind that grows. Slowly after disappointment burns away illusion. 2 weeks later, I returned to Westport. Not permanently. Just for a day. Richard needed several signatures regarding the trust review. I could have handled everything remotely, but part of me needed to see the house again. Needed to see whether it still belonged to my memories, or whether Vanessa had succeeded in turning it into something else entirely. The drive felt longer than usual. Leaves covered the roads. The sky hung low and gray. When I pulled into the driveway, I sat in the car for nearly a minute before getting out. The house looked beautiful, and somehow sad. The front flower beds needed attention. The shutters needed paint. A few leaves had gathered beneath the porch steps. Tiny signs of neglect. Tiny signs that beauty requires love, not just design. Daniel opened the door before I knocked. He looked older. Only a few weeks had passed. Yet something had changed. The confidence was gone. The defensiveness too. Mom. Daniel. Neither of us moved immediately. Then he stepped aside. I entered. The foyer felt different. Quieter. Less staged. The decorative stones were gone. So were several pieces of expensive furniture. Interesting. Where's Vanessa? I asked. His eyes lowered. At her sister's. Not divorce. Not separation. Not yet. But distance. The first consequence. Richard arrived 20 minutes later carrying a leather briefcase. We met in the dining room. The same dining room where Thomas hosted Christmas dinners. The same dining room where Daniel once built science fair projects. The same dining room where Vanessa later discussed removing negative energy. The irony wasn't lost on me. While Richard reviewed paperwork, I noticed something. Daniel kept glancing toward me. Not because he wanted something. Because he was waiting. Waiting to see whether I still viewed him as my son.
Or only as the man who failed me.
The answer wasn't simple. Because both were true. After the documents were signed, Richard excused himself to take a phone call. Daniel and I remained alone. Silence settled between us. Finally, he spoke. I found Dad's letter. My heart skipped. What letter? The one he left for me.
I
remembered the folder. The handwritten note. The warning. Daniel swallowed. He knew. I said nothing. He knew I'd choose the easy path. His voice cracked. I looked at my son. 42 years old. Successful attorney. Homeowner. Husband. And suddenly, he looked 12 again. The boy who hated disappointing people. The boy who would rather absorb discomfort than confront it. The boy who became a man and never learned the difference. He didn't stop loving you, I said quietly. Tears filled his eyes immediately.
No.
I shook my head. He didn't. Daniel looked away. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then he whispered, I failed him. I thought about Thomas, about all the years, all the sacrifices, all the ordinary moments that build a family. Then I answered honestly, yes. Daniel closed his eyes. The truth hurt, but truth was finally doing what excuses never could. It was making healing possible. And for the first time since Thomas died, I felt something change. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But movement. The smallest beginning of it. And sometimes after betrayal, that is enough to start rebuilding. Winter arrived earlier than expected that year. By the second week of December, thin sheets of ice had begun forming along the edges of Lake Warramog. Every morning, I watched the water from the kitchen window while coffee brewed in Thomas's old enamel pot. The cabin had settled into a rhythm.
Wake. Coffee.
Letters.
Walk. Read.
Remember. Heal. Not every day was peaceful. Some mornings grief still arrived before sunrise. I would reach toward the empty side of the bed before remembering there was nobody there. Sometimes I still heard a floorboard creak and instinctively thought Thomas was walking down the hallway. Those moments never became easier. Only more familiar. One Thursday morning, Richard called. His voice carried the careful tone attorneys use when they know information matters. The preservation review is complete. I sat down slowly at the kitchen table. And The archives are officially protected. I closed my eyes, not because of the legal victory, because Thomas's work would survive. His drawings, his journals, his notes, the history Vanessa had. Called clutter. Protected. Richard continued. There is something else. My stomach tightened. What? The review uncovered several transfer requests. I waited. Submitted by Vanessa. Of course. Even now. Even after everything. What kind of transfers? Furniture. Architectural materials. Several library collections. I stared through the window toward the frozen shoreline. She was planning to sell them? Some. A long silence followed. Then Richard said something that stayed with me. Margaret, this was never about redesigning.
No.
It wasn't.
I knew that now. It was about ownership, control.
The quiet belief that the people who built a life become inconvenient once the inheritance remains behind. After the call ended, I sat for a long time, thinking, not about Vanessa, about Thomas, about aging, about how quickly people begin treating older women as temporary guests inside their own lives. The truth hurt because it wasn't limited to my family. I had seen it happen before. Friends pushed aside after becoming widows. Neighbors excluded from decisions involving their own homes. Women who spent decades holding families together only to become invisible once they stopped being useful. The realization felt larger than my own story, and somehow that made it easier to bear. Later that afternoon, Daniel arrived unexpectedly. He carried groceries, firewood, and a tired expression. I opened the door. You're early. I took the day off. I raised an eyebrow. That alone told me something. The old Daniel never took days off. Not for family. Not for grief. Not for himself. We unloaded groceries together. A strangely ordinary task.
Soup, bread, coffee, eggs.
The kind of errands Thomas and I once handled without thinking. At one point, Daniel picked up a carton of milk and frowned. This expires tomorrow. Then we'll drink it today. For the first time in months, he laughed. A real laugh. Small, but real. The sound startled both of us. That evening we sat beside the fireplace. The flames painted soft shadows across the cabin walls. Neither of us mentioned Vanessa. Eventually Daniel spoke. I went into Dad's office. I looked up. At home, Thomas's office had become almost sacred. Neither of us had spent much time there since his death. What was it like? Daniel stared into the fire. It smelled like him. My throat tightened. Yes. He nodded. There were notes everywhere. A faint smile touched my lips. There always were. Another silence. Then, I found one about me. I already knew. Thomas had written dozens. Daniel swallowed hard. He wrote that I was kind. He was right. A pause. Then he wrote that kindness, without courage, becomes surrender. The fire cracked softly. Neither of us moved. Because Thomas had been right about that too. Finally, Daniel whispered, I think that's what happened. I looked at my son. Not the man who failed me. Not the little boy he used to be. Just Daniel.
Flawed. Human. Trying.
And for the first time, I saw genuine accountability. Not guilt.
Not shame.
Responsibility. There is a difference. And it changed everything. 3 days before Christmas, I returned to the house. Not because I missed it, because I needed closure. The snow had melted. Bare branches stretched across a gray sky. The house stood exactly where it always had.
Large.
Beautiful. Quiet. But when I walked through the front door, something felt different. Not in the furniture. Not in the walls. In me. The house no longer defined my identity. That realization surprised me. For months, I had fought to protect it. Yet standing there, I understood something important. The house mattered because of the life inside it, not the other way around. Daniel met me in the foyer. He looked nervous. Mom. Hello, Daniel. I restored the photos. I followed him into the living room. The family photographs had returned. Our wedding portrait. Daniel at graduation. Thomas holding our first grandson. My chest tightened immediately. Not because the pictures were back. Because someone had finally acknowledged they belonged there. The abstract artwork was gone. The marble console was gone. The decorative stones had vanished. The room breathed again. Not because it was traditional, because it was honest. We moved slowly through the house, room by room, memory by memory. In the dining room, I touched the edge of the mahogany table. Christmas, dinners, birthday cakes, homework sessions, late-night conversations. The table remembered everything. In the kitchen, I opened a cabinet. Thomas's coffee mug still sat exactly where I left it. Daniel noticed. "You kept it." "Of course." He nodded. Then quietly, "I'm glad." We eventually reached the library. The room stopped me. For several seconds, I couldn't speak. The shelves had been restored. Books returned. The ladder rehung. The reading chair repaired and returned to its corner. Even the Persian rug had come back. Not perfectly. One edge remained slightly worn.
Good.
Real life leaves marks. I walked slowly toward the center shelf. There stood Thomas's urn, beside our wedding photograph, exactly where it belonged. Daniel watched my reaction carefully. I touched the silver engraving. T.W. Thomas Whitmore. Beloved husband. Beloved father. A lump formed in my throat. Not grief this time. Gratitude. For memory.
For loyalty.
For the simple act of refusing erasure. "Thank you," I said. Daniel looked down. I should have done it sooner. Yes. The answer hurt him, but it was honest. He accepted it. That mattered. We stood together in silence. The library felt warm again. Not because every object had returned, because truth had. Before leaving, I sat in Thomas's chair one last time. Afternoon sunlight streamed through the tall windows. Dust floated in the beams, exactly as it had for decades. I closed my eyes, and for the first time since the funeral, the room felt like home. The following spring arrived slowly. Ice disappeared from the lake. The first daffodils pushed through the soil near the cabin. Life continued.
Not dramatically.
Not perfectly. Just honestly. Daniel and I began having lunch together once a month. At first the conversations were cautious.
Work.
Weather. The cabin. Eventually we talked about Thomas. Then about mistakes. Then about responsibility. Healing happened the way real healing always happens. Quietly. Repeatedly. Without announcements. Vanessa never returned to the house. There was no dramatic confrontation.
No courtroom showdown.
No public humiliation. Real consequences rarely look cinematic. They look like distance, like trust that never fully returns, like invitations that stop arriving, like relationships that become polite instead of intimate. One afternoon, months later, Daniel asked me a question. We were sitting on the dock watching sunlight ripple across the water. "Do you think you'll ever forgive me?" The question hung between us. I thought about the driveway, the contractor bag, the ashes, the library, the months of loneliness. Then I thought about the man beside me.
Trying. Learning.
Changing. Finally I answered. "Forgiveness isn't a door, Daniel." He frowned slightly. "What is it?" "A road." He considered that. I continued. "Some people never start walking it." "And me?" I looked toward the lake. "You're walking." His eyes filled immediately. Neither of us spoke after that. We didn't need to. The wind moved gently across the water. Somewhere in the distance, a boat engine hummed. Life continuing, exactly as it always does. Later that year, on the anniversary of Thomas's death, I carried the urn to the bench beside the lake. The same bench he built 20 years earlier. The wood had weathered. The screws needed tightening. The lake stretched before me beneath a pale autumn sky. I brought coffee. 2 cups. Old habits die slowly. I sat there for a long time, thinking, remembering, missing him. Not the dramatic moments. The ordinary ones. The grocery lists. The shared glances. The arguments about paint colors. The way he always checked door locks twice before bed. The things that actually build a life. Eventually, I unfolded his final letter. The paper had softened from being handled so often. My eyes moved directly to the line he underlined twice. If they ever try to erase us, do not surrender quietly. A smile touched my lips. Not because I had won. This was never about winning. It was about remaining visible, remaining human, remaining worthy of respect, especially my own. I looked out across the water. The surface shimmered beneath the afternoon sun. And for the first time, I understood what Thomas had tried to teach me. Love is not proven by sacrifice alone. Love requires loyalty, memory, respect. Without those things, people can stand in the same house and still become strangers. With them, even absence can feel like company. I touched the urn gently. I miss you, I whispered. The wind moved through the pines. The lake answered with silence. But it was a peaceful silence. Not the silence of abandonment. The silence of something completed. I was 71 years old when my daughter-in-law tried to throw my husband away. What she never understood was this. The ashes were never the thing she was really discarding. She was trying to discard a life, a marriage, a history, a woman she believed was too old, too tired, and too heartbroken to fight back. She was wrong. Not because I destroyed her, not because I took revenge, but because I remembered who I was. And in the end, that was the one thing nobody could take from me.